Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having us. See some new faces and some familiar names. So welcome back to those of you who've been here before, and welcome for the first time. If this is your first experience with a Beyond 20 webinar, we will attempt not to disappoint. I'm Brian Flora. Back in 2006, I co-founded Beyond 20 with the mission to fundamentally change work life for our customers. So enterprise service management has been a real passion of mine for more than 20 years now. I spent the first half of my career working in operations and as a system administrator and system architect for rapidly growing tech companies. So oftentimes I was on the other side of the table selecting and implementing these enterprise platforms to support what were really evolving processes and workflows of varying maturity levels and dealing with some really rapid change. Over the years, I've worked as a trainer, as a consultant, and uh, and really just help to mentor folks on all things Agile and ITIL. I've had the privilege of working with clients across the spectrum from Fortune 100 companies to large federal agencies and really help to drive transformation efforts at the enterprise level. I also recently served as the author or an author of the ITIL 4 publication on digital and IT strategy, what people affectionately or not so affectionately call the DITS book. But I'm glad to be here today, and I hope that you'll find today's session useful. I'm joined by my coworker of almost 10 years and one of my very favorite people, Yas Kusakawa.
Thank you, Brian. Hi, everybody. My name is Yas Kusakawa. I'm a solution consultant here at Beyond 20. As Brian noted, I've been here almost 10 years at Beyond 20 and have had the pleasure of also partnering with a wide range of organizations across various industries to help with their digital transformation initiatives, including state and local government agencies, federal, healthcare, logistics, and so on. My role here is to make sure excuse me, is that to make sure that the solution we provide ultimately meets your needs and desired outcomes. Prior to my time at Beyond 20, I actually worked in the manufacturing space, helping to improve processes there.
Right. So I alluded to this in my introduction, but that I've had the very good fortune to see the transformative power that, along with great people and processes, that technology has in helping people to change work life. We spend a lot of our lives at work, and we believe that if we can make incremental improvements in that, or take something terrible out of your Friday, for example, that it can be really meaningful to people. So. That's kind of been our driving force since then. About 13 years ago, we became one of Cherwell's very first partners. We were one of the first three globally. And over the years, we became Cherwell's largest implementation partner. We created a YouTube channel with more than 400 Cherwell how-to videos, and now with some videos that show side-by-side comparisons between Cherwell and ServiceNow. Recommend you check those out if you're interested in that. But some of you guys were in our webinars that we've done. Yas and I have done a few of these, and I've done some with some of our technical folks over the years about how to deal with Cherwell end of life. And we discussed in those sessions that this was a huge opportunity for organizations to sort of shed technical debt and modernize. And it can be the perfect catalyst to get transformation initiatives started, or get one that has been maybe stuck a little bit unstuck. So, we know that our customers and our business stakeholders have pretty different needs and expectations now than they did when, for example, you first purchased or implemented Cherwell. But, unfortunately, the Cherwell platform has remained substantially the same for many years, not really, adapting to those changes. It's quite frankly a lot of what fundamentally drove us to shift to ServiceNow as a platform, as an organization at Beyond 20, and I think it's driving a lot of you guys as well. So, for that reason and others, we've sort of made the case last time in some of the earlier webinars for why ServiceNow is a great option going forward. Looks like a lot of you guys are thinking the same thing. So today we're going to drive a little deeper into how to go about making that move. And of course, we feel uniquely qualified to help with that journey as the only ServiceNow elite partner in the ecosystem that also has more than 10 years experience implementing and supporting the Cherwell platform. We performed more than 300 Cherwell implementations. The analogy we give is it's sort of like if you've ever traveled to a foreign country with with a native speaker, you have a totally different experience. We're not really, I guess that is to say, we're not trying to rebuild Cherwell into ServiceNow. It's not just a lift and shift, but at the same time, when you go to this other country with a native speaker, you learn, you have a better experience. You learn where to eat, what to do, and so on, and you avoid a lot of the sort of pitfalls along the way. One thing I did want to note is that the way Cherwell's architected, as a lot of you might be aware, it is quite difficult to move data that's stored in journal entries and attachments and approvals and so on to get that stuff out of there because it's not where you would expect it to be in the database, to say the least. And to retain those relationships. So to solve that issue, our team developed the first tool set of its kind that seamlessly migrates essential data from Cherwell to ServiceNow, if you choose to do that. So we can talk about that a little bit later.
Yeah, and one of the things that I'd actually like to highlight is our 4.79 out of 5 customer satisfaction score. That's actually not a survey we run. It's a survey that ServiceNow sends directly to our customers after engagements to check whether we did a good job, and it's how they uphold quality across their partner ecosystem. That's a rolling 12-month CSAT, so that's not something where, hey, we did well a few years back and we've kept that score. No, we need to be continuing to do a good job to maintain that score. And for elite partners like us, ServiceNow's requirement is at least to have a 4.2. So we're very proud that we're way above that number.
Absolutely. Okay. So we're going to start by talking through the establishment of what we're going to call a North Star, and we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. We'll go through the sort of end-to-end process, tackling both the work to be done before and during the implementation itself, and essentially how to get things moving quickly, looking at it from that holistic view. We'll talk about who to engage within your stakeholders and partners and when, and what things to consider as you're thinking about your data and what you might want or need to move across or make available in the future. We'll round that out with a recent customer case story, along with some ideas as to how to get going on next steps. But with that said, this webinar is for you. This is your time. And so we want it to be useful. So if you have questions, please go ahead and drop those into the chat. Lindsay will be monitoring the chat throughout the session. And as she mentioned, we'll be addressing those as best we can. If we don't answer your question right away, it might just be because it's something we've got coming up in a slide that's 2 slides from now, and we'll hold on to that. But we're going to try to get to those things in real time to the extent that we can. So let's talk about your why. Right? Some of you guys have seen the TED Talk on starting with why, and we believe that's it's really important to establish a North Star. So a lot of Cherwell customers, soon to be former Cherwell customers, when we first start talking, tell us that they're looking to get off of Cherwell before end of life or somewhere around that period of time. And then when we dig into it a little further and we ask what specifically they're looking for, are you looking for just another ticketing tool, or are you looking for something that can be a springboard for true enterprise transformation? Maybe unsurprisingly, most folks say, well, I want something that will help us transform. Right? We want to use this. We're going to put a lot of time and money and effort into this platform replacement. So let's make it worth it, right? Let's go out and make this something that really changes the trajectory of our organization. And our most successful clients are the ones that take the conversation in that bigger direction and look at what's possible. And that is your North Star, right? It's something that your teams, your leaders, and ultimately your customers can get excited about and can really rally around.
Yeah, with that, I'd like to talk about just a few examples of things that we're hearing. Within the state and local government, what we're hearing more and more is that people are looking to provide citizens with an end-to-end case lifecycle, not just IT tickets, but constituent services tied seamlessly to IT when needed. And so, for example, what we're hearing is that, hey, if somebody comes to the website and has an issue with renewing their driver's license online, the form's not loading, they're hitting submit, but it's not doing anything. When they submit that, that's probably coming in as a customer service ticket of some sort. And then that can be tied back to an IT ticket. So then you have end-to-end visibility within the platform and traceability as well. Within healthcare, what we're hearing is that we really want to be able to enable our medical staff to quickly and easily report issues. Let busy clinicians report issues right away from Epic or within another EMR so that problems are logged and resolved quickly, right? They're there not to submit IT tickets, but to take care of patients. So that is the goal, to make that process as simple as possible and also to get the equipment up and running as quickly as possible as well. And then within regulated environments, what we hear a lot is preparing for cybersecurity audits such as CMMC from NIST by standing up a trusted CMDB and establishing easily auditable asset management processes to simplify their compliance reporting. And one thing that I'd like to point out is that the North Star isn't static, right? So one organization that we're working with, their CIO made clear that CMMC compliance, this thing that I mentioned at the end, is the immediate North Star. But once that's achieved, he wants to expand ServiceNow to support higher level initiatives within the organization. A North Star can and should evolve as you meet different milestones on your journey.
Yeah, it's interesting, us. I mean, one of the things that, when you're talking about the things that you're seeing in state and local government and so on, it reminds me of things that we saw our higher education customers saying, 5, 10 years ago. And this way they were kind of out ahead of the curve. And the idea of a one-stop desk, right? That students in higher ed want to go to one interface, and it doesn't matter if you're having an issue with housing or an issue with, paying your tuition or parking or, any of those kinds of things, or your rec center membership or whatever. You want to just be able to go to one single interface for all those things. And now, it seems like the rest of the commercial and governmental world is sort of caught up with that notion, right? That everybody just, whether it's a facilities ticket or it's a payroll question or it's HR or it's an IT ticket, we don't want to go to 6 different places for that stuff, right? We just want to go to one seamless customer interface that allows us to get service there. But the North Star is what kind of drives that, right? That could be part of it. We had one healthcare customer that said with their North Star, if we could provide this experience for our clinicians, wow, we'd be the hero of the whole organization. And we thought that was I thought it was a cool way to phrase that your North Star is going to help you be the hero to those that you serve, right? It's going to help you be the hero to those that you serve. And that's what we get excited to help our clients do. And there's really no other platform like ServiceNow that's invested in industries and industry specific solutions and innovation like the Gen AI, the way that they have, and has really created all these purpose-built applications, purpose-built architecture, and support things like in healthcare, clinical device management, and public sector digital services products, and automation for factory floors and service management for IoT devices. There's really just nothing else out there that allows you to do these kinds of North Star things that that we see a lot of customers and clients trying to do. So it's important that you find something that, as it is today, is going to meet your North Star, and in the future, and so you don't just have to have it in your roadmap as a wish list, right? That it's something we can really start with right out of the gate.
Yeah, like what Brian is saying, you're looking to have something that will meet your needs today, would meet your needs 3 years from now, right? You're not
Right,
looking to
right,
rely on a roadmap.
right. I mean, like I said, we're putting a lot of time and effort and money into a project like this. So let's go live hitting something meaningful on day one, right?
Yeah. And with that, so what does an actual implementation look like, or what does an engagement look like? And at a high level, we have 5 phases, right? Initiate, where we're doing prep and project kickoff. Define, where we're capturing the requirements. Once we have those and start to finalize those, we'll begin to build, where we'll be building in sprints. And once development is complete, we'll have UAT and training and prep for go live and such. And you'll see that we have an arrow representing phase 2 running in parallel under that. And this is because during the engagement, it's very common common for people to get excited after seeing and getting a better understanding of what the platform can do, right? And then the good idea fairy comes along. And some of those items will, make sense to incorporate into the engagement. And we'll talk a little bit about MVP later, just because the platform can do so much, right? And then people start to come to the table with more and more ways that the platform can provide value to the business that in ways that you just couldn't with your legacy solution. So all of
Right.
that's to say it's very common for us to have a phase two engagement following phase one. That said, that's actually only a part of what we consider to be the entire engagement. So I'll get
Yeah,
back.
no, I mean, I was just about to say that same thing, that, the define and procure side, this is very often an underappreciated side piece of things, right? If we look at that holistic, start to finish transformation process that we were talking about a couple slides back, define and procure can be a really big portion of it that's oftentimes kind of ignored or not really thought about until later.
Yeah, and this is really where often we see things stall, right? So if you have a target go live date, whether it's based on the license renewal, whether you're going all the way end of life, 12/31/2026, it's critical that you don't have things be delayed, right? And when you hear about this define and the procure part, particularly procurement, people just think about determining the requirements, defining the solution, and just submitting it, right? And then that's what people think of. But I'd like to take a moment to get a little bit more put a little bit more emphasis on the logistical aspects of those things. So when we're talking about things that can influence the timeline, right? I put there no check and double check your procurement process. This is everything it takes from the time to get an NDA in place so we can have a proper conversation, as well as doing third-party security and risk assessments, right? If you've deployed Cherwell on-prem and continue to have it on-prem, you likely didn't need to do a security assessment. That's more common now with SaaS solutions. It's a step you'll have to take. It's a consideration that you have to keep in mind. It's something that you need to talk to your security office about. And while some of these things, that are listed here seem obvious, I've seen these start to add 1 to 4 weeks at a time, and then suddenly it's 3 months after the solution's been finalized before we can actually, begin scheduling the kickoff. And obviously, we're not saying that you start vendor setup with every prospective vendor after the first meeting, but you should know the necessary steps and making sure you're moving forward with them in parallel in a way that you're able to meet the timeline that you're looking to meet. I mean, just as an example, if you're a public entity, do certain socioeconomic certifications or do certain contract vehicles like NASPO make it easier to buy and avoid the RFP process, right? Because I think everybody's on the same page that, RFPs can be important, but nobody loves doing them. And I would say that, the reason I say check and double check is so it really is surprisingly common the number of times I'll be talking to somebody who's been at the organization 10 years. They think they know the process like their back of the hand. But guess what? There was a new procurement director. They changed the processes they didn't know. And everything gets delayed. Just as an example, this week we received an executed statement of work for an engagement where we were all looking to start 2 months ago.
Mhm.
But the practical reality was when they opened that box of what needs to get done to bring everything across the finish line, there were just a lot more hoops that they needed to walk through.
Right. And in that particular case, I know the one you're talking about, we were able to sort of restructure the delivery plan and surge developers and so on, such that it won't end up impacting the organization, the client organization, in terms of a renewal date. But those kinds of surprises, if you think you have 2 more months and it crosses over and causes you to have to, for example, renew Cherwell for another year when you weren't planning to, has a real cost to it, right? That's funding that could be spent on your new project rather than, another year on your legacy platform, which nobody wants to do.
Yeah.
So, one of the things that's important to move quickly and have your migration be seamless is to get to the point where you can start using the platform as quickly as possible, is to define a solid MVP, minimum viable product, or phase one. One thing that we talked about in the very first slide is that we're really focused on delivering rapid time to value for clients. And shortening time to value means getting those licenses that you're paying for in use and delivering value to your clients as quickly as possible, rather than spending an incredibly long development cycle where you're waiting to roll out the whole thing all at once. So your phase one, your MVP, it doesn't necessarily mean that your MVP is small. But it's enough to get you live with something that, number one, gets folks excited, that's going to make a great first impression, and that tackles something that's really worth solving, right? And that's a lot of times different than saying that it's like for like, right? I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've said some variation of the fact that if we take Cherwell and we just simply rebuild Cherwell for you in ServiceNow, we've all failed, right? We've all done something very wrong here. This something that, your MVP does not necessarily mean we're just exactly building what you had before. We're thinking beyond just parity. We're thinking about, what kind of a desired outcome is going to, again, get folks excited, make a great impression, and solve a problem that's worth solving. But, the other thing in terms of developing a solid MVP, it's not just defining what you're going to do, but it gives you a framework by which you can say no to the great idea fairy that can cause phase one to become bloated and, end up with the dreaded scope creep and, prevents you from getting to done. So invariably, as Yas was mentioning, folks get excited during the project and they want to add things. They start to see the capabilities of ServiceNow, and the good news is that almost every time, as we're getting through the development portion and the deployment portion of it, people are seeing things that are way beyond the expectations that they were that were set during the sales process, and that's great. But you have to protect your phase one, right? So if it doesn't align with your North Star and what you've scoped for that MVP, you can still add it to your enhancements list and do it as a fast follow or a phase two or something like that. But your North Star, your MVP, is what gives you the framework to actually be able to say, no, yes, that's a great idea, but it's not going to be something we're going to do right now. Uh, um, so that's a big reason is giving you the ability to say no or not yet. On a separate note, one recommendation we always give to folks is to do what we call a reverse demo, a demo of the Cherwell system. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more later. But, we have folks on our team who know what to look for, and they'll help us, ask the right questions to help tease out requirements. Is, as you guys are probably aware, the best and worst thing about Cherwell is you could build anything you want. So if you've been on Cherwell for a long time, there's a pretty good chance it's not really out of the box. You may have some custom business processes, custom workflows, one steps, all those kinds of things. So we can help you determine from looking at that whether something that's built out is just, maybe it was built as a workaround that was built due to a limitation in Cherwell. Um, but it can be done automatically out of the box in ServiceNow, or if it's something that requires a different configuration approach or a different module, or maybe that's something you have a little bit different need for. So it can give you a much more detailed and accurate sense of what you'd be looking at in terms of an implementation, in terms of time, cost, et cetera. And these reverse demos are super helpful to give you what Yas said earlier, which is clarity and ultimately accuracy and speed. I will tell you just one thing here on the reverse demo. A lot of times people get really intimidated by this notion of, setting up a demo with Beyond 20, because we know that, it's not part of your day-to-day job to demo software, most likely, right? Or to demo a platform. So people think, I want to do that, but I need to prepare, I need to get resources together. I haven't had a chance to really get my script together and all that stuff. You don't have to worry about any of that. Basically, you just plan on scheduling a 45 to 60-minute Teams or Zoom meeting. We'll, get the NDAs and stuff in place in advance, but we can go through and help guide you as to what we need to see, and what sections of the platform we need to look at. So you don't have to worry about doing a lot of prep or this being a heavy lift on the client side, but it is super helpful to all parties, and I think definitely a good use of time as you go through this process. Okay, enough on that. Joss, you have anything more to add on the reverse demos?
Yes, actually. So
So not
I
enough on that.
sorry. Um, as Brian said earlier, if we copy and pasted Cherwell into ServiceNow, then we have all failed. So that's obviously not what we want to do. It really is just a good way to for us to get an idea of what's working and what's not, right? It naturally through the conversation, we people end up going like, yeah, and this is really important. This one step that we built, everybody uses it. If anything, we absolutely need that day one. It's like, great. That's something that we now know we can capture it. We have a better understanding. The other thing is as Brian noted, we speak the language, we know what to look for. So a lot of the times when folks pull up a system, it's like, okay, oh, I see an ITPT tab. Like, what are you using that for? You don't need to explain what ITPT is, but you can give us a high level overview. We can talk about if that's the intended purpose of that map or if it's something a little bit different. But ultimately, we're just able to speak the language and navigate that conversation a little bit more smoothly because we're looking at something together. It really is the way we can start to have a conversation of where you are today and where you're looking to go and what that might actually look like. And actually, as it relates to MVP, I did want to emphasize the importance of getting the right people in the room to determine what it is. We were working with a government entity earlier this year, and we were working with their managers and their directors, and we figured out the scope. Hey, we think everybody's on the same page. We're going to present this to the CIO, but it's more of a formality. Everybody seems to be aligned. Then we get into this presentation, and the CIO immediately pipes in and goes, "Why isn't the self-service portal in phase one?" Like it's to him that was critical. The managers and directors were focused on improving the technician experience, but the CIO was focused on providing more visibility into the client base.
Right. Yeah, I remember that. And that was the idea there was that, by delivering visible value in phase one, it allowed the CIO to generate, some of the, for lack of a better term, political capital in order to be able to do a lot of the things that he was envisioning doing with the platform, the real, kickstarting a transformation effort, right? Being able to do a lot of bigger, longer term things. But that starts with getting people to really transform the customer experience on day one so that there's buy-in to do some of the other things that some of which are maybe a little bit behind the scenes and some of which are not. But more visibility, more visible value, that gives more social and political capital, and that just really helps drive those transformation efforts. But again, that changed what the North Star was, and it changed what the MVP was. It was really important to define that before we went into it, rather than find that as we start. If you get halfway through the project and you start doing demos for executives when you're a few weeks from go live and you find out that you've gotten this wrong, then that's unfortunate.
Yeah. So
So we should go back to the product life cycle. Yeah, go ahead.
yes. All right. As promised, back to this. And hopefully by the time you're actually doing this, right? You've done everything that we've discussed. You were able to buy on time, you're able to start the project on time, and you have a well-defined North Star, right? Huzzah, great. All the stars have aligned and we've gotten that. Now, with that, I'm going to go a little bit more into what we do during our design sessions or the define phase. So these are kind of the three pillars. It's educate, demonstrate, and define, capturing requirements or defining the requirements. The educate, what we're really going to be focused on is process best practice. Not only that, but specifically best practice within the ServiceNow platform. Demonstrate is really just pulling up your ServiceNow platform and showing you what it looks like. It's one thing for us to say, hey, this is how incident works in ServiceNow, but it's another thing to actually show you and be able to give people the opportunity to say, hey, what's that button, what's that tab, and really make it a conversation where people to get familiar with the platform. And the last bit, of course, is capturing where the solution is baseline versus relative to where you need it to be as an end state. And one of the things I'll actually note is we capture stories within your ServiceNow platform. So ServiceNow has an agile module where you're able to capture stories, backlog, things like that. And we have found that by putting stories within folks' instances, right? One, because they're your stories, you should have them. The thing that's very helpful is that people get used to navigating the ServiceNow platform. They get used to going into these places. They get used to filtering, searching, just things that simple on its face, but in terms of muscle memory and navigating the platform, it becomes very, very helpful as we prepare for go live.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as Yas is mentioning, we're very workshop focused in the early stages of the process to gather these requirements and capture these user stories. And a lot of what people ask is, okay, great. How can we prepare to be more efficient and effective during these things, because obviously it's a big time commitment on the client side as well, to go through, or it can be for some of these things. So one of the things I really focus on is training, and recommend that people go to ServiceNow University. ServiceNow University is the kind of online hub for training resources that ServiceNow has. If you're coming out of the Cherwell ecosystem, you're going to find that this is an entirely different universe than what you were experiencing before. Cherwell was kind of hard to get good training resources, which is why we ended up creating 400 and some Cherwell how-to videos, because a lot of folks ended up learning how to deploy Cherwell from third parties like Beyond 20. ServiceNow has extensive role-based training paths that you can do, a lot of which include lab environments. I definitely encourage people to get out there right away and start with that. And the good news is that while you can take live instructor-led virtual training that can be purchased using training credits and things like that, most courses are now available on demand, and the on-demand classes are free. So you can go through and take a really extensive amount of training on just about anything you want. But they have role-based training paths with lab environments that really allow you to configure and mess around the platform, and that's just a really great way to kind of get your feet wet before and during the workshop time. So
Yeah, and one thing I'll add is that it's not that it is free to customers, it is free, period.
yeah.
Meaning that anybody can go in, create an account, and start taking courses. So
Yep.
that's something that they've made available because they understand the need for it, the demand for it. So definitely highly recommend that. All right, so getting back to the project lifecycle, again, we've captured the requirements, we've read back the stories, and we've gotten approval on them. We'll begin to build in 2-week sprints with sprint reviews or showbacks at the end of each sprint to get feedback, validate that our understanding of the story and use case are correct. Once we've completed build, we'll do an end-to-end test on our end in what we call system integration testing, or SIT, and then hand it off to your team for user acceptance testing. We also do training during the engagement. That's separate from what Brian mentioned with ServiceNow University. Our training is intended to supplement some of the core foundational things that are there. We'll have end user training and admin knowledge transfer sessions where the focus will be on things that are specific to your implementation, right? Specific to your environment. You don't need to, learn the core ServiceNow terminology from us. Again, ServiceNow has not just a bunch of courses, but really, really good product documentation that'll outline all of that for you. And then we'll go live, and we'll have the go
Ooh,
live. And typically there is cake, which
there's
is
cake.
always very exciting. And then one thing that I want to get back to on the phase 2 portion that I mentioned earlier, Brian kind of mentioned it in passing that sometimes it's a phase 2 and sometimes it's a fast follow. And that's true. It's not always that, another project that follows this cycle is what's the right next step, right? Sometimes it's deciding to put those enhancements to the system iteratively over the course of 12 months, 6 months. We have our Momentum Managed Services offering where we help organizations not only admin and maintain and upgrade their systems, but also, allocate time to build out these enhancements. So that allows you to strike the balance between your resource commitments, right, and continuous improvement because, people are busy, right? Especially in IT, people are very busy. So we understand that you're not going to be able to be fully embedded in a project at all times. That said, again, there's a lot you can do with the platform, and it really just makes sense to continue to invest in it.
Right. And by a fast follow, the kind of main distinction there would be that in that case, maybe we go live, and at the same time, we've got a couple more sprints continuing. Maybe there's 2 or 3 more sprints and then another go live with additional functionality, but kind of continues seamlessly. But in keeping with that whole rapid time to value ethos, we're getting tangible value out in front of your customers as quickly as possible, even while we're still working on getting some other functionality. It might come really rapidly afterwards, right?
Thanks for clarifying that.
Happy to help. One of the things that people might see that's a little bit different in the way Cherwell projects were typically run is, the way we structure our ServiceNow projects is based around this kind of idea of what we call a PLT, or project leadership team. So the project leadership team is really kind of a Venn diagram of these three main areas that are the keys to success to our projects, right? So we have engagement management, business process consulting, and technical architecture. And these things, we have a director level resource that heads up each of these organizations within our delivery organization, and that kind of organizational structure is also built into individual projects as well. So it's kind of like the three branches of government there, where they are co-equal and kind of provide checks and balances on one another. But the engagement manager is going to be kind of, a bit more than just a project manager. They're also just managing the relationship from a business standpoint with our clients and stakeholders. Technical architecture is obviously driving the technical configuration of the platform, and working with our business process consultants to the BPC office, builds the user stories, works to understand the business processes and to ensure that what we're actually designing from a technical standpoint meets the needs of the business from a business process standpoint. So all of those things are evaluated, to make sure that we deliver our projects on time, on budget, within scope. But we've got these kind of three checks and balances to make that happen.
Then who needs to be
Okay.
involved and when?
Yeah. So when we look at the key timeline influencers for, again, this kind of holistic end to end from procurement to go live, the, in terms of design, who do we have to have involved in this requirements gathering? And one of the important things is to make sure that you've got the right decision makers in the room. Fundamentally, you might have, three or four different uh, stakeholder groups that have different opinions on what a business process should look like. You sort of need to have someone there who can break a tie, who ultimately can say, okay, yeah, there are a bunch of different opinions, but this is what we are going with. And if the person who is not the org chart tiebreaker, for lack of a better way of putting it, if they're not able to attend that workshop, then we just need to make sure that someone on the team is empowered to make those decisions to free up resources, not necessarily just funding, but people resources and so on, and to serve as a champion within the organization to sort of to drive this. But we're also going to want to make sure that we're interfacing with not just IT, but other parts of the organization that'll be influenced by this, right? They'll the CIO at a minimum know it at some point, or the CHRO if you're doing an HR service delivery project or what have you. A steering committee should be maybe formed. Sometimes we've had a steering committee formed that meets once a month, but fundamentally, you just want to make sure that you've got a systematic approach to resolving the inevitable conflicting priorities. So again, sometimes it's one person or a few people, but figure out who your product owner, program manager are, senior leaders who can make the call when those things are at odds with one another. The other thing is we want to make sure we've got an SLA in place, for turnaround time for decisions. If we've got to make a decision, we need to get that back within 24 hours or 42 hours or whatever is appropriate for your organization. Um, I will add that, when you think about the involvement, the client involvement in one of these projects, it's kind of barbell shaped, right? You have quite a bit of involvement in the beginning as requirements are going to be gathered and so on, and then less so as the build is happening. At the end of each sprint, you're going to be looking at the showbacks and looking at what was built and so on. But then at the end, it surges up again as we get to testing. And you really need to make sure that we're planning to have people available during that user acceptance testing phase, so we can go through and find anything that wasn't thought of beforehand, or that was is not working the way it's supposed to, or what have you, and it happens inevitably. So just making sure we've got those resources available for testing. Any process documentation that you have is helpful to, if we can, have those things in advance going into the workshops. And and completing the training, right? Your administrators, I would advise starting that, start it now, right? They can go in, today and create accounts and get the labs and start working on that stuff right now. You do not have to wait for go live week to start getting trained on ServiceNow. So um, one of the things we said we'd talk about earlier, Yas, anything I left out on the timeline influencers
The
before?
one other thing I think I'd add regarding the slide specifically notes admins complete ServiceNow training, but there's actually a great 3-hour course, again on demand, free, called Welcome to ServiceNow, and that pretty much anybody who's going to be regularly part of the project team and needs to have a solid understanding of generally how to navigate the system. It's a great course. It comes again with a lab environment, right? So it really, if you were to do it today, you'd get to start navigating in a ServiceNow instance today. So that's also one I would recommend.
Yeah. Okay, and then we have to talk about data migration. Are we going to be bringing these things across or not? It's kind of a complex conversation sometimes, but in terms of what we can move from Cherwell and bring it across, we can bring any record in from a major business object. So incidents, problems, changes, objects from your CMDB and other data sources, your assets, any knowledge articles. I will add that since Cherwell was built on sort of an ITIL 2 mentality, and incidents and service requests are both in Cherwell as the same incident business object, and a request is just a subcategory there. Our platform will separate those things out in ServiceNow correctly so that you get, if you're bringing them in, you'll have incidents as incidents and service requests as requests. But we can also bring in attachments, embedded images, journal entries, approvals, and those records and so forth, as well as, like I said, any major business object within Cherwell. So that could include your if you're using, facility service management records, and you've got some work orders in there, or HR, or whatever, we can bring those things across.
Yeah, and one of the things that we've seen happen over and over again is when we start the conversation, people go, "Hey, I don't think I'm going to bring anything over, right? This
Mhm.
this is the old world. I don't want to muddy up my new system, so I'm definitely, we don't need to bring anything over." But then we start to dig into it more, and we go like, "All right, well, do you have knowledge articles, and do people use them?" And go, "Yes." It's like, okay, well, is an intern going to be very, very miserable for a week or two as they copy and paste, or do you want to just get them brought over? So really common ones that we see people end up deciding to bring over is knowledge articles, again with attachments and inline images. That tends to be pretty critical. um, Change management records for SOX compliance, for publicly traded organizations, that tends to be critical. Incident history for one could be retention requirements, particularly if you're in the public sector, or if those are the de facto knowledge articles that your team relies on today. So those are the types of things that, just as a starting point, we recommend starting to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we look at, the Built with Now offering that, we built with ServiceNow a few years ago, the very first one of its kind. Um, One of the decisions you can make is whether you want to bring this in live or make this just simply available in ServiceNow as an archive table. I mean, I think all else being equal, we sort of generally recommend that second approach because, it's since we're not directly recreating, Cherwell in ServiceNow, it's very unlikely that you're going to have exactly the same fields and one-to-one mapping uh, from Cherwell to ServiceNow, but you might still want to have that historical data available if you need to get to it or to provide a more seamless customer experience, right? Uh, so then we map those Cherwell fields to the fields in the ServiceNow implementation. We migrate that data over to your QA and test environment, and then test it about 3,000 times, and then finally migrate it into production so you can have the benefit of having that historical data without necessarily, tainting your records and metrics in the new system. There's still, we definitely recognize that there's generally a desire to start fresh and to start clean in the new system. So, we can support both of those objectives simultaneously by using archive tables.
All right. So with
And
that, I
actually,
like to
yeah, I was going to say we've got an example of a recent project doing something like that.
Yeah, so in this case, this is just going into kind of a engagement or series of engagements that we had with a publicly traded logistics company who moved from Cherwell and Footprints into ServiceNow. We were able to consolidate these into a single system and bring over critical change records as change history as part of their SOX compliance. That was absolutely critical to them, and we were able to do that because of this tool set that we had developed. And they actually ended up following up the implementation of ITSM with an implementation of ServiceNow's project and portfolio management solution, SPM. The initial deployment of that was completed in 10 weeks to help them avoid a 6-digit renewal cost. That was critical to them. Obviously, that required a lot of focus on their end. And one of the things that really made this possible, and I think it is another critical component to consider, is buy-in, right? The CIO, before this engagement began, pulled in all of the other IT directors. He wasn't just talking to the director of the IT PMO. He pulled in all of the directors, information security, infrastructure, all of them to say, hey, this is a critical project. We are going to need some of your resources as part of testing, as part of, just getting access to certain systems and things like that. This is a priority. And what we were able to do is replace the tool that they were looking at renewal for, but also many, many spreadsheets and many, many PowerPoints. So while everybody from project managers to directors had to spend hours monthly and or quarterly to provide reports up the chain on the status of projects. Now they just pull up ServiceNow dashboards. That's what IT project managers pull up to report to their management. And actually, that's what the director of the PMO pulls up to report to IT leadership. And what I found out later that was really cool is the CIO, when reporting to the C-suite on the initiatives that IT is working on, he just pulls up a ServiceNow dashboard. He no longer has to chase somebody down to get an updated PowerPoint presentation or Excel sheet.
And that is changing work life, right? And that's
Yes.
exactly what we're talking about. It's something that, makes somebody's work life easier and more efficient and so on. And hey, that we spend a lot of time doing those things. So anytime we can eliminate pain from a large section of your life, that's a win, I think.
Yeah. So
So,
how to get
but
started?
yeah, no, sorry, but that quote that you had there, I just wanted to add one other thing that, because Cherwell, one of the great frustrations for us with Cherwell as a platform was that it does not really very well support multiple developers working at the same time, right? Because of the way blueprints are published and so on. And we don't really have that limitation in ServiceNow. So, there are opportunities where in this case in particular, they wanted to pull their first go live forward really significantly, and we were able to surge resources on it because we were able to gather requirements quickly and then surge a larger team in order to get that done in a way that just simply wasn't possible on the Cherwell side. So it doesn't mean you can always as we all know, there are critical path things, and sometimes more horsepower doesn't necessarily get you around the track faster. But uh, there are things we can do in ServiceNow that were just not at all possible in Cherwell, and that's certainly one of them. So yes, let's talk about next steps and kind of a quick recap here. Um, when we talked about, how to get started here, one of the most important things is defining that North Star, that strategic direction, and that will ultimately define your MVP that helps you decide, where the most value, that you can get to your clients as quickly as possible, what that is. Designate who those decision makers are. If it's somebody from the C-suite, that's great. But if not, who's going to sit in the room during the workshops and actually define, and break ties and help move forward. Defining the peripheral stakeholders, the people that are going to want project status reports and want to see things as we go through at various stage gates in the project. Don't forget about organizational change management, right? I mean, you're going to involve folks in actual change, so that, we want people to be prepared, excited, enabled, ready to go. The last thing we want to do is to roll out ServiceNow and then have folks, feel like they're not able to use it. So, there's training, there's education, and then there's just kind of socializing this notion. Um, and at Go Live, we provide cake, so that goes a long way, right? Uh, but plan your data migration strategy early. Figure out what you're going to move. As Yas might have said earlier, when we were doing Cherwell implementations for many years, most of the time people started out saying they wanted to bring everything in, and then once you got into the project, they said, now we don't think we need to do that. It seems like in the ServiceNow world, and in today's more modern, enterprise service management world, folks are starting the opposite direction. They start out saying, no, we don't need to bring anything in. We're leaving Cherwell by the side of the road, and we're moving on to a new modern, platform. And then they get, halfway through the project and go, oh no, we've got this SOX requirement. We need these approval records. We need this CMDB data and so forth. And so, it's better just to think about those things earlier than to try to bolt that on after the fact. And, again, as we said, the last thing is to just make sure you understand what that early procurement process is, because that is part of your timeline. If you're looking at getting off of Cherwell before your renewal or before end of life or what have you, then really make sure you understand what that end-to-end process from where you're sitting today to going live on the new platform looks like. And a big part of that can be, defining requirements, selecting your vendor, and understanding what that procurement process looks like. So if we're going, next slide, Yas.
Oh, actually,
Uh,
I want to, sorry.
oh yeah, sorry, I
Uh,
left something out.
Yes, as it says on the slide, check out our white papers. So we have put together two white
Mm,
papers that are about transitioning from Cherwell to ServiceNow. One is about more of the technical differences in the platform, things like how security is handled, how the service catalog is different. And the other one is talking about going more in depth into the data migration portion. They're both, excuse me, fairly robust in terms of content. So definitely, if you have not already checked those out, recommend checking those out. All right. And then with kind of Q&A and next steps. So if you have any questions, obviously, please feel free to chime in. Otherwise, reach out to us and schedule a call. We can do a 30-minute discovery call to understand what you're working for, what your hopes and dreams are, what the challenges are, and conduct a reverse. And if willing, can do a reverse demo again, 45 to 60 minutes. That tends to be very, very helpful. Then we can get you a ROM for your MVP, and if everything looks good, we can be working on all of the other kind of logistical aspects that we discussed as well.
absolutely. So with that, questions.
Yeah, folks, if you've got any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or in the Q&A. As it stands, we have one question, and I think we've gotten this question every single time we've run this webinar, is how long does a Cherwell to ServiceNow migration typically take?
Indeed, yeah. And the answer is a very unsatisfying, it depends, right? Because it does really vary from organization to organization. What functionality, how customized your Cherwell system has been, what we're deploying, how large the organization is, and so forth. With that said, we are very, very focused on rapid time to value. And, what people hear me say all the time within Beyond 20 is, the fast eat the slow, right? So we can generally work more quickly than our clients are going to be able to absorb the change. We will not be the bottleneck on a project. We did a project a little while back for a large retail operation, and we got them from Cherwell to ServiceNow in 8 weeks and saved them a big renewal, and they were very appreciative of that. So, that's probably about as quick as you could ever expect to do it. I would say probably the fat part of the bell curve for most ServiceNow deployments of this nature is going to be somewhere in the what do you think, 12-week range, Jonas? Is that 12
Yeah.
to 16.
12 to
Yeah.
16, depending on the range.
Yeah.
For a city, they went with, the discovery solution as well as, ITSM and hardware asset management. They did a lot, but they were able to do it in 14. Again, that
Mhm.
required the focus, that required buy-in from leadership and things like that. But it's definitely, those types of timelines are possible. One of the things that, we want to be talking to you about is, hey, let's make sure we're all on the same page in terms of expectations, because we don't want to put together an SOW and then you say, well, our resources aren't available, right? We want to
Right.
take all the things into consideration. If you're higher ed, end of the school year, start of the school year, K-12, same thing. Like, there are things like that we want to talk through to make sure that we understand the timeline we're putting together for you is one that will work for you.
Right. And I mean, especially as you look at projects that are starting, in the next few months, you have to be thinking about holidays, right? You have to be thinking about like, hey, are we scheduling, an intense period of UAT that's going to be around a time when maybe we've got a lot of people out, or for federal, if we're looking at end of federal fiscal years and the beginning of the new fiscal year is oftentimes very very busy for folks. So we have to be thinking about, as we build our project schedules, how does it overlap with these other obligations that are inflexible for us.
Cool. Well, thanks everyone for
Thanks.
joining us. Hope you found it helpful. Thank you, Yas. Thank you, Brian. And I will be in touch with everyone shortly with the recording of this session, and I'll send some links out to the white papers and some other helpful resources as well. Hope you have a lovely Thursday.